Heard you're not feeling well?
For what?
Are you feeling okay?
No, I feel awful.
So
I'll be out of here by 7:30. I feel terrible, to be honest.
You're welcome to sit here if you want. I don't really
Are
care.
you contagious?
Oh, so my name tag's over here, but the paper and the stuff's over there.
In about 2 minutes, I'm going to get some tea, but let's
Take
get
this.
started.
All right, thanks.
Hello.
All right, let's try to get started.
Councilmember Berman. Chair DuBois.
Here.
Councilmember Niss.
Here.
Vice Mayor Sharp.
Here.
3 present.
And I don't think we have any oral communications.
And if anybody leaves, you've lost the quorum.
Yes, that's right. So I guess we're going to item 1, which is disability rates and workers' compensation audit.
I'll be listening. I'm going to grab some tea.
Yeah, and I know that you're not feeling well, so I'm going to try and get through this
How
first
did you know
item,
that?
Because Beth told us that we might lose a quorum. So I'm going to try and get through the first
I'll make
item
it- I'll
fairly
make it for a
quickly and
little
leave a
while.
little more time for the second item. So Harriet Richardson, City Auditor, here to present the audit of disability rates and workers' compensation. So Yuki Matsura was the senior auditor on this, and she can't be here tonight. But Lisa Wahara, who worked on this audit, also is right over here in the audience.
Welcome.
So what I'm going to do, I'm assuming you've read the audit, and so what I want to do, instead of going through the normal process, I have a PowerPoint that talks about the, it'd be the PowerPoint, yeah, that talks about the audit scope, objectives, and the findings and the recommendations. But what I really want to do is just skip over to the main finding, which is finding number 1, and spend a little bit of time over that on that. But if you have questions, we also have Sandra Blanche here from HR, who works as the risk manager for the city, and we also have a representative from York Risk Services Group. Sherry is, where is she? Right back here. In case you have any questions for her, York is our third-party administrator for workers' compensation. So the main finding is that the city's injury and illness prevention program has lost its effectiveness, and there's several reasons for that. The main one is that when the previous city safety officer left the city, and that position was cut, and his duties were distributed among all of the different staff, the senior HR analysts in PSO. PSO reorganized, they redistributed the staff, but yet they did not provide appropriate training to those people on workers' compensation. And so they've been working with an outdated safety manual that describes how to do things in a way other than what they currently do. There's also been a lack of citywide safety committee meetings, and then there's also been insufficient employee training, city employee training throughout the city on safe economic work practices, which increases the risk that you're going to have more repetitive motion in injuries. So our recommendations really focus a lot on making sure that adequate resources are provided to the workers' compensation program. Right now, we have not seen an increase in injuries or cost since that loss, but as that position remains unfilled, the risk increases that you're going to have more costs because people don't know how to adequately monitor the program to minimize those costs. So that's really what I wanted to focus on for this first audit, and I think Suzanne wanted to make some comments regarding the audit.
I just wanted to comment that, our response is in the audit, and I really appreciate Sandra's work on responding. But I do think when we reduce resources and dedicated resources to a program such as injury prevention and workers' compensation monitoring, there's a loss. You can't take a job and divide it among, 5 people and make sure that every day you're staying on top of the program, making sure training's happening. So last night in the budget, you adopted the budget that included a dedicated position focused on workers' comp, funded through our insurance fund, and I think that that's going to pay dividends. And and that we will be able to focus. I do think we are also working on securing the services of a safety officer on a contractual basis for the city. The utilities does have a safety officer and does a very good job, and they're a significant part of our workforce. But it is important that we have an on-site, someone providing our safety inspection. And then finally, I know that Sandra has shared with me and York that York does have a computer solution that can help us address the timeliness on some of the issues. We've been using a manual process, and the computer system that's recently been updated by York will allow us to do immediate reporting from departments directly to York and Human Resources simultaneously, and that will dramatically improve some of the findings addressed in this report. So I don't want to spend a lot of time going into detail, and we can respond to detail, but I do think the dedicated position in combination with the contracted safety officer functions and then the new computerized system that we'll be implementing citywide that York's providing will really address most of this audit.
Yeah, and from our perspective, the dedicated resources were really the big concern here, that as Suzanne said, you start splitting up those tasks and you start losing the effectiveness because people don't know exactly what their responsibilities are and what the law requires them to do. So,
Tom, could I ask a quick question?
Well, I was just going to say, can we just go straight to questions?
Sure.
Yeah, or just to inform us on this. You didn't include any measurements, data, or so forth. How is it in here somewhere and I didn't see it?
no, we did. You mean like comparisons with other jurisdictions?
But also, what's percentage-wise, what's happened with us? You said it's costing us more, right?
No, the risk is that it will cost us more. We have so when you look at exhibits 2 and 3. Packet pages 12 and 13, you see some fluctuation, and you see 14 and 15 actually look like they've gone down, but what happens a lot of times is those claims, the full cost of the claims is not known within a short period of time. So those costs will continue to go up for the recent years until those claims are fully closed. But so you see, even if you go back to our performance report, which isn't part of this, you'll see that there's some open claims pretty far back, and part of that's because some of these costs continue over a period of years. So right now, our number of claims did go down. FY13 is where we lost the city safety officer, and so you're still seeing some of the effect of what that person did. But now, as we start seeing in the program, in the day-to-day operations, some of the things that are happening, we can see that it's likely that those costs are going to start going up because they don't know how to administer.
So what we should do is take this way back to 2006. I mean, is this a good judge of what that person did?
I think from
What page are you
2006, packet page
12.
12 and 13.
I have different notes.
Do you have a packet page? Exhibits 2 and 3.
Okay. I have page 4. Do you know how it's accounted in a particular year? So when expenses come in for 2014, do they hit our books for this year, or do they go back?
I don't, I'm not certain on that.
Yes, they do.
So the expenses actually incurred in this year, even though it was a claim from 2014?
Right.
But you track the claims also by year.
By year.
Year
So,
filed.
it's really, from an accounting perspective, it's different than from a claims
Got it.
perspective.
Okay. Why don't we just go to broad questions? Do you want to
Yeah,
continue?
no, that's fine. Leave that. We'll just kind of keep chiming in, I think.
All right. Are you happy with the city manager's response?
Yes, there was 2 that they indicated, however, that they partially agreed.
Okay, which one? We're back on page.
It would be on packet page 51,
Okay.
which is going to be your page 42.
Okay, yeah.
So they said they partially agreed with recommendation 3.1,
Okay.
and on the next page with 4.2, But when I read those, they actually sounded like they agreed. So I wasn't sure why they said
Yeah,
partially.
and what Suzanne said sounded slightly different, which was you're going to recreate their form in DocuSign. Have you decided now to use the York form directly?
I think we are going to use the York form. They've just improved their system, and it sounds like it's going to work for us.
Okay.
So are you going to update that partially?
Yeah, we just
Yes.
met recently.
Because it sounded,
So I think the auditor had recommended for HR to do all of the entry,
Mhm.
and so we
This-
would
yeah.
disagree with that
HR,
recommendation. The department would do part of the entry, and HR would finish the entry.
So,
Okay.
so the idea is you're in a department and someone comes in injured, you go right into the system and enter, which is a best practice. And then it immediately goes to HR and York, so we're all on in a more timely basis.
sounds good. And you're good with that? Sounds good. to me.
Yes,
Okay. Were there any other partially agrees or?
just those two.
So there's the first one. The second one was
4.2.
partially agreed, 4.2.
It's on the quarterly reporting,
Right.
monthly, quarterly, and annual reporting.
Right, and basically what we wanted to say is that we think that we are getting reports, but we need to work on tailoring those, and that for the most part, some of the reports that were originally in the contract are not as useful, so we need to work together. But we do get information, and they do report to us, and we do have a good working relationship. There's regular telephonic meetings, but we do need to make sure we're looking at the right
Is
data.
anyone from York here?
Yes.
Okay, I missed the introduction, so
Yeah.
good.
I'm Sherry Owens, I'm the senior accountant.
Great, thank you.
So Sherry, actually, since we mentioned you, do you have any comments on any of this, of how we could streamline it better, or do you agree with the auditor's recommendations?
Why don't you come join us?
Come sit down at the mic and
So yeah, I do agree with the findings. We worked really closely with Lisa and Yuki, providing the information, the claims examiner, the unit manager. And when we talk about the reports that were, and some of the items that were in the original contract is from 2006. So we've updated processes, things have changed here at the city. So I think it's just revisiting those, seeing what we can use. Loss of the safety officer, I think some of those reports got lost in that shuffle as well. I've been on the account for a year and a half and have been here multiple times to meet and try and come up with new and creative ways to help. And it truly is a partnership. So, and I think there's a lot of things that we can help the city with as we move forward. And like I said, we're here as a partner.
so we're going to be making changes to the York contract. Is that part of it or not? I was confused.
I
about
mean,
that.
the amendment really the primary amendment would be what reports they're providing to us and what frequency, but.
Will there be a cost associated with that or not?
No.
Okay, good.
so it sounded like some departments were already dual reporting to York and HR at the same time.
Utilities.
You're saying now everybody's going to do that?
Well, basically, it would streamline this. Their new addition to the system streamlines it so that
Yep.
utilities puts in and it goes
Yeah,
directly
so
to each.
I think utilities was already doing that.
Yes.
But
We would
other
work with-
departments weren't, so are all departments? gonna do-
Correct. We would work with all departments to get them to enter the report into the system.
Okay, so then York would automatically get it. Right, okay. I have a few
And it would
questions
shorten
here.
the time frame.
So in the text it said there were some state laws that we're not in compliance with. Are those just reporting timeliness or?
It's primarily reporting timeliness. There's a risk that you could get fined for if an employee doesn't report the injury, if the city doesn't report the injury within 5 days of the date of knowledge. In discussion with Suzanne, she indicated that she's not aware of the state actually having fined anyone. York may be from their experience, but we haven't experienced any fines, so we did add that to the report, that we haven't experienced a fine, but the risk is there.
Yeah. We want to be in compliance, and
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons for this change.
And how long do employees have to report an injury? Because it sounded like sometimes that takes a while. Like, do they have to report within?
They're
some-
supposed to report it immediately.
Right.
But that's not to say that, I mean, the common story is, I tripped, I thought I was fine, but you know what, 2 weeks later, I'm not feeling fine. It's not, I'm not getting better the way I thought I would. And so that's always.
Right.
There was also some talk, I guess we had a comprehensive safety manual, and then it said departments have their own manuals.
Right.
I guess the question is, are those department manuals comprehensive, and do they include the general information?
So I believe the department manuals are pretty comprehensive, particularly the 4 departments that Yuki and Lisa looked at. But with the citywide manual not being completely up to date, we've requested as one of our recommendations that the city update the citywide manual and then make sure that the department manuals align with that. So we want to make sure there's some consistency in how the departments are doing things.
Okay. And then I see Police Chief Burns here, and actually I had a question about police. It looks like about 40% of our costs are in the police department. So I was wondering, do you guys do anything extra or different about training for safety in general?
I'll give you you know what, sit here, so you have the microphone.
And maybe you can weave firefighters in at the same time, because as I recall, police and fire are usually the high,
Yes.
the high numbers.
Dennis Burns from the Police Department. So we have a pretty robust kind of wellness program, which includes, strengthening, endurance, diet, and we get training on that on a regular basis, and that's intended to, be a preventative method. We also have a number of policies in place, and kind of the nature of police work. A lot of it is involving safety, and officers are evaluated on that on an annual basis. And so we hold safety very serious. I think one of the reasons that some of the numbers were so high this year is we had 2 very unusual cardiac cases where the officers will ultimately retire, and a large chunk of the monies, the city's monies, were paid on these 2 claims. I think fire is similar. They really they have a very strong wellness program, and again, it's focused on flexibility, strength, and endurance. And their folks are evaluated regularly on their safety procedures, and they're taken offline in the event that they show that they can't comport with these policies.
Thanks.
You bet.
You guys have any questions?
It seems like everyone's in agreement. It doesn't seem like there's any. So I guess I had some, questions like. So we're hiring I was confused. Are we hiring a person in the budget to do this, or are we contracting out for this work?
No, we are actually hiring someone in HR to facilitate, monitor the program, and get people back to work, make sure everything's being processed, make sure training is taking place. There's many suggestions in this report, and we added back a dedicated position that had been removed. It's being paid through the insurance fund, so the reduction should pay for that position.
Okay. Yeah. So when you say it's added to the insurance fund, every department is assessed something for the insurance fund, correct? Do we expect the insurance fund to then not go up? Is that because there's less? Because every department, if you have more people in the police, are the police assessed more? Is that how that works? Or is it everyone gets assessed the same?
It's based on experience and exposure. It's a combination.
But on a department basis, right?
Yes. They get allocated.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Just back to the chief for a minute. As we look at these, I'm just looking at the numbers on packet page 12. Maybe there's a better one for us to look at. But looking at this, if we take it as 100%, what would you guess, Dennis, is the number of police and fire in that? And thanks. And
So police were 40% of the total in terms of money.
but it doesn't give it in terms of people, so,
In terms of
So in
claims.
terms of people.
yeah, claims, but are we going to figure claims equals people?
What, you might want to look at Exhibit 8, packet page 20. That might be more helpful for what you're asking.
Okay, so if we look at, well, there are all kinds of figures here, though. I don't think there's just one that I can pull everything from. But overall, from looking at this, because I can remember from the county that fire was often a big issue. And I'm guessing it probably is here as well, because that's the kinds of physical types of things that happen if you're in a fire or even in the paramedic job. You're more likely to get claims that cost and what this doesn't tell me here, unless I go through and analyze it, is just what the overall price is. But this is saying to me that you're about 1.5 times what fire is. Is that right?
I think for
Or
these,
is-
I think for
Because these
these,
are all stats, I know they're misleading, and that's why I'm asking, say more about this.
Yeah.
I think I can answer what she's asking. If you're referring to Exhibit 8, so if you look at the 4.7 million, is that what you're referring to as
Yeah,
the one?
uh-huh.
So as Chief Burns mentioned a little bit ago, there's 2 injuries that comprise a good portion of that, and that's in the footnote. And if you subtract those out, then it's 2 million for them. And so, when you have an individual case that is really expensive,
You
it's
mean
gonna
unusually high severity, is that what you're
Yes,
talking about?
yes.
Yeah.
You're gonna have a higher cost that's disproportionate to the rest of your injuries.
Yes, so I understand that. But maybe Dennis wants to just expand on that a little, because this is always, police and fire almost always wear the cost. Lies or lays, which one is it?
you false, very good, yes, exactly. I think fire typically is ahead of police or is more expensive than police because it's much more it's kind of a labor-intensive, almost like a blue-collar job where there's a lot of lifting and twisting
Yes,
and pulling, and there's just more opportunities with all the equipment that they're pulling and grabbing from their engines and their truck. There's
And
just
lifting
more
heavy
opportunity.
people,
Lifting people on the gurneys, exactly.
Exactly.
Right. Police officers tend to have a lot of repetitive motion injuries, getting in and out of cars or bending over and lifting things, types of things. Some involving wrestling with people. And typically we see knees, backs, and shoulders are going to be the most common injuries that you'll see from both police and fire. And again, we're going back to we had 2 outlier cases that are very unique that they're similar, and unique that they happened at the same time, and that they were so expensive and so severe. So other than that, I mean, I think we're kind of somewhat stable. I'd love to get them lower, but the reality of it is, it's as you know, flesh and blood, and we break every now and then.
Yeah. So, and the other thing, Harry, you talked about just briefly was how we compared with other jurisdictions that are
Right.
similar.
Right, we didn't specifically put that in here, but we were pretty comparable. We did look at it, but we didn't put it in the report. Maybe we should have.
Well,
But we
just
do
always
have a
is-
chart that we could put send to you if you want to
Yeah.
see that.
The reason I'm asking is sometimes there's something to be learned from other police and fire departments. Not that our police or fire need to learn anything from anybody else, Dennis, but just because, there are those
Sure.
times. Whereas Sunnyvale has the combination of safety.
Right.
It would be interesting to know how those are, because they have interchangeable roles,
Yes.
which is kind of fascinating.
So I think under finding 1, you mentioned that we have some outdated information that's posted.
Yes.
I didn't really see any of the recommendations address that. Is that included?
So we tried to keep the recommendations somewhat high level, so it's part of updating the whole manual and making sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be. When you update the manual, you look at the
Okay, so that was included.
it's meant to be included. So, and the audit team actually went around to different facilities and looked at what was posted, and there is quite a bit of outdated information posted, or, for example, in this building, it's on the A level, and not everyone goes down to that level and sees those posters, so there should be something in each of the work areas that's visible to
Does
where people
anyone read
go.
the posters?
I don't know, but you are required
If
to
you're
make
gonna post
sure
it, it might
that
as well be right.
if you
Well, I'm not saying- I'm
get
just letting you know.
injured, it helps you know what you're supposed to do.
I think it's also reflective of needing an update,
Right.
because it really needs to be right on our computers, intranet
Mhm.
sites, so wherever you're at, you could access it.
Right.
Even if you're not at a bulletin board.
Since we have York here, I wonder if, as we go along, whether there are things that you want to add to what our discussion is, because this is, here, you have the expertise in this.
I think my only comment on the police and fire is they do have presumptions. And so when they do have certain injuries, there's a perception that they're accepted. So that drives costs as well. Sometimes they're not rebuttable, which means it's just they're given that benefit.
So I saw
That
that.
can
It
drive.
seemed like a lot of police officers and firefighters make claims that are denied.
And because
And it's hard to deny police and firefighter claims,
Yeah.
which means they must have been completely specious, right? I mean,
so and that's what we work through that with the city, because we don't just flat deny a claim. The examiners work with the city, and sometimes there has to be an investigation, and there's some things that we need to find out. So sometimes they will deny a claim.
On the police side, every workers' comp claim or injury is investigated by the supervisor that day, or that ideally within the next couple days.
so if you make an egregious claim, I mean, obviously there are things that are on the line, right?
Mhm.
But if you make one that's totally not true or fabricated, and you look at it and say, are there repercussions for doing such a thing?
Sure. The district attorney's office has got a special unit that is funded by insurance companies that will go after, quite frankly, folks that are abusing the workers' comp process.
And we work with probe investigations, and they are a highly respected, highly motivated group of folks who have prosecuted many cases. They've found
Highly motivated must be the,
they have they
the word.
truly believe in what they do. We have a mini conference once a year, and they come and present and let us know what they've collected during the year and return to counties, cities, and other public entities. So yes, there is a fraud unit that will investigate. There are specific things that they look at when it's sent to them to determine whether it's being prosecuted or not.
But these denials, I don't want you to get the wrong impression.
No, I'm not
No,
saying
no,
that. I'm
no.
just-
These denials essentially were not found to be work-related. They were non-industrial injuries or illnesses.
And we also delay claims, which that allows 90 days for investigation to happen and to see if it's truly a workers' comp injury.
so that brings up a worse discussion though, and you can answer it or not, Dennis. If you find that somebody is making a claim that it's work-related and yet it's discovered that it isn't, do we have a process that we go through?
Sure. I don't think that we've had one of these cases. So there's doing nothing, and then there's taking the case to the district attorney's office. And in between, it would be a policy, a violation or internal affairs investigation, where we would go ahead and see if we could prove beyond a preponderance in internal affairs investigation, did this person falsify some documentation or commit a fraud, even though we don't think it's going to be provable at the beyond a reasonable doubt level. And we could pursue that.
Okay, thanks. I don't want to keep pushing on that, but I know that has to be an issue.
So that's the standard preponderance of evidence before you, for internal affairs.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
beyond a reasonable doubt for that.
For a criminal, right. And typically, though, in most internal affairs investigations, you're going to want, more clear and convincing before you're going to be, taking somebody's property rights. But
Got it.
But we would work with York to do an investigation. We wouldn't have our own police department
Do it.
doing the investigation. And we have done those type of presentations to the district attorney. It's been some time. But they have the resources to take cases to the district attorney.
And they're rather difficult cases, I think, for the DA to prove, because you could have somebody on video, doing some sort of activity, and they could have a claim that they injured their back or their knee or something like that, and their response would be, well, I was having a good day that day, right? I felt good, or I felt good for the last few days, and so. And I think soft tissue, this is not my area of expertise, but soft tissue injuries are difficult. You're going to get conflicting opinions from doctors in a court of law.
It's true.
Switching gears, I just wondered if we could make a note. So one of the recommendations was to update SAP, and it sounds like we're going to do that. But I wonder if we could capture a note that we also, when we move to the new ERP process, maybe define, design this process, just to capture that since it's coming up soon.
Right, and IT is getting ready to start, I think August 4th starts their first kickoff meeting on discussing requirements for SAP, for the new ERP.
Okay. And then on page 42, it talks about the performance reporting and not getting accurate data. It sounded like SAP days off were more accurate, so I wondered if we could use the more accurate data in that report.
So the difference there is that the state has a limit on the number of days that have to be reported, and so that's what's been going into the performance report, and so it doesn't truly capture when someone's been off longer than 180 days,
Right.
because we stop counting based on the...
Right. So I'm asking, can we switch that, use the better data?
You could do that.
I mean, don't you put together a performance report?
Right now we do this, our next topic.
Yeah.
Based on data that we provide to the
Yeah.
auditor's office. And I think it's been a footnote in the data that says it's capped at the federal limit.
Right, but we don't ever say what the total is, so, yeah.
So one other question. When do we get rid of this, the safety person again?
13.
13.
So what happened was he got sick and retired, I believe, and then
He went on disability and retired.
And the position was eliminated then in the budget.
So why
cycle.
did we eliminate the position?
Or it wasn't? Yeah, I guess it was.
So what was our thinking? Was our thinking we'd save money, or what was our thinking about that, and why has that thinking changed?
Well, I was not here.
It's easier that you weren't here because you'd be more. There's no investment. You can say it was a bad decision. It was, or I mean, just what was the reasoning behind it?
So the reasoning was there were other areas that needed focus, and we changed to a business partner model rather than a functional area model. The thought was you could spread out the work amongst various staff, but workers' compensation is so technical that the staff really couldn't focus on recruitment, employee relations issues, and learn workers' comp all at the same time.
So I think, and this is just one of the things I've been working with Sandra and Rumi as Rumi's approaching HR and restructuring, but I think the business partner model, which you see often, it's been...
So what is the business,
I will share.
It'd be great
It's the
if you just
idea that you take specialized positions and you convert them to generalized positions assigned to departments, and they become the end-all for that assigned department or departments. So
What do you
police
mean, the end all?
department,
Each department is an
police
HR
department,
person.
you call me Suzanne Mason, and I'm going to take care of everything. And you have a one-stop shop. But the problem with this, and it's something that HR professionals really have been struggling with, and I just have to say, you know, this is something that I've dealt with. If you expect that person to be your, you know, person dealing with labor, person dealing with workers' comp, recruiting all your vacancies, it is very hard, number one, to have an individual who has specialized knowledge, who has the ability to respond quickly within 5 days of, you know, making sure paperwork's moving. And so Rumi's coming in and working with Sandra, and we are switching back to a more specialized focus. And I think, you know, in dedicating this position as well, I do think this position will be dedicated, but some of the safety officer functions, the in-the-field functions, we're probably going to be contracting for. Okay. So it's going to be a combination, but it's really putting a specialized knowledge base and training around that person. Sometimes you feel like it may be more efficient and more customer-friendly to go with a more generalized approach. I think it's challenging.
So, sensitive to Liz here, do we have a motion on this?
I'll move we accept the audit report. That's what you're looking for, right?
Yep.
Yes, did
Anything
you want
else,
to,
council?
did you want to make the motion to have them modify those two recommendations before we forward it, their response to those two recommendations before forwarding it to council?
You're fine with that?
It was the two we talked about, 4 point.
You mean the partially?
Yes.
I think there's
With the new
reasons that we
responses.
feel it's partially. I think that some of the reason around some of the report changes was because we wanted them to change. But yes, I guess if it's technical that they're not providing the same exact reports that were in the contract. But I think it was done on purpose. It wasn't a mistake.
But what I'm saying is that what you've written here is different than what you said
Oh,
tonight.
you mean on the
after
computer system.
And after having spoken with York about what you're actually going to be doing.
With the computer system?
And-
we can also
Well, there were
do
two
that.
things. There was two partially agrees.
Right.
And
But
I
that's-
thought, the first one I thought,
3.1 and
3.1 I thought you said that your opinion has changed on that. Was I incorrect in
Oh,
understanding?
no, I'm sorry. I meant our action plan, not our opinion. Our action plan is a little bit different.
Okay.
And that we have found that York's system, with some of the modifications they recently made, might be a more effective way of doing this than the DocuSign system.
Which was the recommendation from auditing, so you would, it sounds like you would agree instead of partially agree.
Right, we need to improve the reporting
Wait, no,
timeliness.
you went through that too fast. So,
Okay.
so I'm not sure. So they still partially agree.
We still partially agree.
But the part you partially agree, the part you don't agree with is which one under 3.1?
Well, let me go through this again.
Because I thought you were agreeing, so I'm confused.
Well, their specific recommendations are about how we do it, and we are saying we are going to do it differently than the specific
So
recommendations.
how are you going to do it differently?
So in the first bullet, it says, at the end of the sentence, it says, with HR staff being responsible for completing the Form 5020.
Okay.
We're proposing that the department will initiate the Form 5020
on the computer system?
on the computer system, and HR will receive it, or at the same time, complete the salary portion and submit it to York.
So we think there's a computerized solution where this was suggesting a manual process. So I feel partially agree. We agree the process needs improvement, but we are not agreeing on the way to do it. So
I think you actually are, and maybe just the way the recommendation is worded isn't quite clear, because I think the third bullet, I think, clarifies that we're saying that trained staff, which could be PSO staff, enter the sensitive personnel or payroll information. So I think when you look at it as a whole, I think you're actually agreeing with it.
So, I mean, I don't think we should wade into that fight.
Yeah.
But I do think that would be really helpful, I don't know if you guys agree, that you can say partially agree, but then in the action plan, you call out, so if council's interested, you call out exactly what you're going to do differently than what it says in 3.1. And that way, any council member can look at it who hasn't been on this committee, because this goes on consent. And that way, it's no confusion, because I can't read your action plan and understand why you're partially agreeing after this discussion today.
It's just a different process we're proposing to
But
use.
that's fine, just say that. But I mean, say what that, just address the different bullets about what's different. I mean,
If you want us to put agree, I guess
no,
where,
I
where
don't.
we're at is
No,
that.
see, I do not want you to put agree.
Okay.
I just want,
The
I
action
want
plan.
clarity.
Right.
I remember I'm a lawyer. I look at the document and I say, I want you to match what's written here and say, we are not doing, you know, we're not doing the HR staff, we're doing this. I want you to take each bullet and tell me what you're doing differently. That's what I want. I just want clarity. I mean, I actually think it's great if you don't agree. That's fine. It doesn't bother me one way or the other. I just want to know what you don't agree on and what you're doing.
I guess if you look at each of the bullets, they are not all that, they're sort of one process that looks to be pretty manual. And we're suggesting that we think using the online claims reporting process is
See,
a
when I read
better
it,
process.
when I read it, it says ensure the use of York's online forms, and you said you disagree and we're going to use DocuSign, but now it sounds like you've changed your mind and you're going to use York's online forms.
Okay.
So
That's fine.
that
Okay,
was
we'll redo
that was
it.
my confusion.
We'll redo it.
Could I ask one more subjective question? Do we find that this is more about saving money or about accurate reporting or about something else that maybe I can't define?
Safety.
Well, yes, of course.
I would say it's a mix. So I think that by dedicating a resource, you will save money in the long term, because if you don't have people who are implementing an effective illness and injury prevention program, you're going to have more injuries. So by having someone who's focused on that effort, you can keep your costs down. And then there's the accurate reporting, just to make sure that we're compliant with state law and don't get fined.
Yes, yeah, that,
Okay,
of
so
course.
we had a motion. You're asking to change 3.1.
Yes,
Is that
I'm
it?
asking to change 3.1 and 3 point, what was it?
4.2.
4.2. That you stand by what you had here, right? You partially agree with what you wrote in this one. That's what I understood from the comments previously.
Okay.
Yep. Ready to vote?
Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, thank you for coming from York.
Yes, you're welcome. My pleasure.
No, that's not New York, that's the old York.
All right, so moving on to item 2, which is discussion, recommendation to provide direction on the annual performance report.
Correct. So I tried something a little bit different here instead of a PowerPoint, but I see that I should have done it in landscape form. My idea was to have one sheet up there that we can look at, but we do have it in front of you instead of having to flip through multiple pages. We've discussed in the past the process for producing the annual performance report. And when I first came here, the report was 130-something pages. My office was spending about 2,000 hours a year. Combine that with the National Citizen Survey. They weren't tracking the hours separately between the two. I am now tracking those separately. We have streamlined the format of the report to reduce labor hours. And so this last year, it was a 57-page report, and we've reduced the hours just on the performance report to about 400 hours, so significant savings by streamlining the format. One of the things that I was curious about when I first came here was the extent to which those measures were used to actually manage performance. So we did a couple of things. One was we sent it out to the departments and said, tell us everything that which of these measures you actually use to manage your performance. And then we also looked in the budget book to see which of the measures were also used in the budget book, to see if there was alignment between what we were reporting in the performance report and what we were reporting for budget purposes. So there were some large discrepancies between the two of them. 49 of the measures are in the operating budget and the performance report, and the departments use them to manage their performance. 180 of the measures departments use to manage performance, but they don't put them in the budget book, although the budget book is somewhat selective in what goes in there. And 24 of the measures were in the budget book, but they weren't being used to manage performance. And then 129 measures were not in the budget book and were not used by departments to manage performance. So we were collecting a lot of data without it really being used to manage performance. And the concept of performance measurement is that you're going to use it to manage your performance. One of the things that also stuck out with me is that the auditor's office was producing the report. And a basic element of internal control is that management reports on their performance. It is a management function. It's always been a management function. Jim believes it's a management function and that he should be the one who's actually reporting on the performance. So what I'm here to do tonight is really just have some discussion about how we transition from it being something that our office would continue doing to something that the city manager's office would do. Normally, you see performance management in the budget office. It's typically something that's done because they do the budget, and it's typically part of the budget process. One of the key things that I've noticed here is that the way we do it, it's just really separate. They're really separate processes, the performance report and the budget, and they're not synced in any way. So when Walter was here, he bought for the city an add-on module to the budget system, Questica. It's a performance measurement module, performance management module. And the idea was going to be that it would eventually become one process where everyone in the city enters the data in one place, and it's used for budget purposes, it's used for performance management. With Walter leaving, then with staff changes, that's been somewhat on hold. And so now it's kind of where do we go from here? Another key thing that stood out to me is we were collecting all this data in the auditor's office, and I think there was a sense that, oh, the auditor's independent, therefore there's more validity to what's in the report. But it really was a data collection exercise. Give us your data and we'll put it in this format. And we weren't validating it in any way. And so by looking at changing it, I think the auditor could play a different role, which would be we do some validation of the data every year. It would be on a sample basis. We would select some measures and we'd look at where's the data coming from. No, it disappeared there. Where's the data coming from? I lost it on the screen. There it goes. Okay. Where's the data coming from? Is it reliable? Does it reflect what you actually think that you're measuring? And I can give some examples in other places where I've worked. We did this a lot of times as part of our audits. We'd look at the measures. We looked at, for example, in IT one year, we looked at they had a measure for customer service, and it was what percentage of their customers were satisfied with the service. And their measure, the way they collected the data was if someone didn't complain, they counted it as 100% satisfied. And it was a whole series of measures that were that way. And we found that with other places that we actually looked at the performance measures. Now, I'm not saying that Palo Alto is that way, but I'm saying that there is some value in looking and making sure that when the measures are reported out, you know that what you're seeing means what you think it represents. And so what I'm proposing is that we do a soft transition. The question is, during that soft transition, do we continue to produce the report? Right now, we have a summer intern, Marissa Lynn from Stanford.
Welcome, Marissa.
And there was an intern in the city manager's office who started working on this process, Eileen. I don't know if any from Germany. I don't know if any of you met her. And so what we've done up to this point is taken the data from Questica and try to align the measures that are in the performance report and what's in the budget book to see where the gaps are. And Marissa's going to continue with this project. We're going to identify where the gaps are, what things really should be measured. One of the things that's a key item in this is that when you do performance measurement and performance management, you really want to focus on the items that are critical to your mission. You can measure lots of things, but you can get so out of control with measurement that you really aren't focused on what's the most important things. So what we would do is set up a framework, and then the city manager and departments would fill in the gaps with identifying what is important to them, what's the really most important measures, and then come up with a new reporting mechanism, which would likely be more frequent, because right now we report about 6 months after the end of the year, and it's too late to take corrective action of something that might be taking a negative trend in process. So if you're monitoring throughout the year, which is what performance management is, then you take corrective action when you see a negative trend developing. So what I wanted to do tonight is just kind of have some discussion about what this process would be, what the direction should be for us and the city manager's office for moving forward in this direction. I do recognize that shifting it to OMB and shifting it to more of a performance management system would likely require an FTE at some point in OMB to take that up, and I know right now that's not in the budget. So
I'd like to suggest we break the conversation into at least two pieces. I think on page 7, there's some options for how the report's created. And I think we should talk through the options, not just focus on this one
You're on
proposal.
page 7. Mm-hmm.
And maybe separately, we should have a discussion about key performance measures and how we can improve the actual data that we're getting. And I think you kind of mix two different issues there, kind of who does the report and how, whether the data is useful or not. What are we reporting?
It is both of those issues.
Well, I guess it's a broader issue for me than that. To me, it's a management tool issue in real time, as opposed to that at the end of the year you get these performance. What I heard her say was, these issues come up and you can correct course.
Right.
And so part of it for me is not for us to tell them what data to collect, frankly. It's for the city manager's office to determine what data will be the most effective as a management
Well, it's
tool.
multiple levels, right? It's a tool for the council and feedback to the council. So on one hand, I'm looking at it as a dashboard for us. But it should also be aligned with management, which is their tool.
Wait, do you all see this coming out every month or something?
Well, so again, that's what I was trying to break into the data, which the data could be used for multiple things, versus how do we produce a report for council and the public on performance of the city.
Well, what do you mean by the data could be used for multiple things?
Well, the data could be used by managers ongoing throughout the year if it was available. That's separate from putting it into a report.
And that's the tool that I hear the city manager wants to move towards.
Yes.
Is this? No? No. Yes.
We would like to be measuring useful information.
Right.
Yep.
And we'd like to be using Questica to collect that data.
Right.
And it definitely is going to take some time. Walter was prepared to jump off into
And he left.
Into performance reporting. It required a lot of effort to do the transition. And I just wanted to share a few things with you just to comment on, because I totally agree. We agree with Harriet's recommendations. I think part of it is a resource function and the frequency, as well as making this conversion. And we talked about this a little bit, that it's going to take time for the budget or OMB to restaff and have the adequate resources to lead this effort, and probably a dedicated FTE to make sure it's continuous. The other part on data collection and frequency, which in my past experience I found challenging, is it depends on where your data is coming from and whether it's readily available. And so let's say you're measuring recruitment timeframes, time from a vacancy to fill it. That's a very pertinent HR performance measure. If your system measures that, you're in good shape, and then it uploads to the performance tracking system, you're in great shape. But if it really takes staff in HR to manually kind of shut down the system and then, do a manual effort to record.
What a nightmare.
So it is a balancing act between the value of the frequency of the data and the frequency. Another measure, so I'm just giving you examples. It's not as simple, and I actually, in a previous life, purchased a performance management system. We brought in a consultant to do a citywide effort on rebuilding the entire city around, we called it Focus on Results Long Beach, and had a whole framework. And it was a very labor-intensive process. And so
it didn't work.
It never fully got off the ground. And so I think keeping it simple.
Because it was too labor intensive.
It was too labor intensive.
So it really got in the way of what you hoped
to
get.
accomplish.
Yes, and it got
right.
bogged down all
and,
that.
and did I need monthly data on how long it's taking us to hire? That's really an annual measure that tells me something. So I think it differs. Now the police department better be measuring their performance data on a very real-time basis and change course.
Well, I think we're talking about what are those KPIs, key performance indicators, that actually are useful to the manager, right? Because then if you need to use them for your daily job, you'll be doing them.
Well, I think the manager should question if it's taking a department 4 months to fill a vacancy, because that's a problem. And do we have the right resources? Do we have the right process? Have we created these generalist business process, that are doing too many things? That's good data, but it's really not meaningful until you have a year's worth of it to see what's really our average time. I think there's different. I don't think we can make blanket statements about frequency, but I do think the overall recommendations here, and that there are measures we should see on a regular basis, like time to answer a dispatch call.
So I went back and looked at some old performance reports, and there's a lot of numbers in here that I think are kind of meaningless, right? And we're spending a lot of time gathering these and cleaning them up. So I think that's what we're talking about. What's the right data that's really useful? I think the departments should figure out what's useful to them. And I do think council should have some input in looking at what's useful to council in terms of, really it's the efficiency ratings, what's the output for whatever the input is. So like the library, we have like how many volumes we have, and it doesn't really mean much. Some of the public works metrics are actually pretty good. It's like percentage of potholes fixed. There's other areas where that leaves a question, which is like how many potholes weren't fixed. Those are the kinds.
Normally, you see like timeliness for fixing a pothole as a measure, and then
not the number. It's the timeliness.
It's the timeliness, and then it's your PCI for overall street condition.
I do think there's a lot of areas where we're serving the public where what's actually most relevant is customer satisfaction, really, and we don't report a lot of that, and that would probably involve some kind of survey or something.
So I agree with you. Things like the PCI index, they're useful. What's more useful is to say PCI index increase or decrease.
That one's not bad. You can kind of.
You're right. But you're right. It's did things get better? Did things get worse? Or
I think the so-called data collection and measurements and so forth that we've concentrated on a lot lately are also sometimes, as you just said, Suzanne, can start to get burdensome. And if it's the kind of thing that gets reported on a regular basis, you're reporting it every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks or something like that, I think it starts to get in the way of your overall assessment of a performance. It's like taking little bits and pieces and saying, gosh, right now it's a disaster, and then 2 weeks later it's terrific. But I think we have to watch for that at the same time.
And even now, I would say some of that happens because every year, the departments know we're going to ask for this every year, and we send it out. And it's not like they have the information and can just hand it to us. Sometimes we usually give them about a month, and a lot of times we get, can we get another 2 weeks? Can we get another 2 weeks? It's not like the information is just handy.
To me, that's a real
it's an effort for them to gather the data.
And
even
again,
at the end
it
of the year.
depends on the information. And
we're
having
asking for-
someone stop do their job to go gather
Yeah.
the information is challenging. And so finding that balance between,
To me, it's the indication of the mismatch. We're asking for data that they don't find useful for their department.
Correct.
So
Well,
why are we
and,
even
and
asking for
that, that's what you
But
see in here
sometimes it
with
takes time to
these numbers.
correct it.
Yeah.
If it's a manual effort, it's great if you have a system that's uploading directly into, and producing the data.
Yeah.
But
But I'm just saying, if we're
Yeah.
reporting data that aligns with that department manager's goals, they better be tracking it throughout the year, because they need to know how they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd be totally in favor of getting rid of meaningless data.
153 measures.
I would support that. Right.
There was one in here on code enforcement.
we totally agree with the recommendation. But I also think when we start determining the measures, we should look at what is the beneficial frequency of gathering this data.
Sure,
We're totally with you.
Because sometimes
Yes.
a once a year look at that.
but it needs,
Example, yeah,
it
and
needs to
other
be,
times,
it needs to be honest, though.
yeah.
There was like a code enforcement metric. It was like how many code enforcement things were responded to in 120 days. And that just seemed like
It's,
like the time that was chosen to make the report look better, because I'm not sure most residents would say 120 days was that responsive.
You know what I also think, and I don't know this, but ICMA, the International City County Managers Association, has a very robust performance measurement process, and they it's very intense and thorough. So some of these measures may have come off the national measurement program, because you want to be able to compare jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So you try and create a barometer for consistency. So that measure sounds like an ICMA measure to me. And here that we may have a higher standard within 30 days or within 2 weeks.
And in some cases, I think that if some of that data came, it said, oh, we should collect it for ICMA purposes, we're collecting it for ICMA purposes and not because it's beneficial to us.
I'm not really interested in collecting data for ICMA purposes.
I think this was an early on push. We are debating this right now because ICMA actually has a system and all those things, but you can't, your point is really well taken, in that each jurisdiction has different barometer for what's acceptable
Yes.
performance, and different parameters in the way the technology we use to do things, and so.
it's just a question about the historical perspective. The auditor has done this for how long?
Since 2002.
So switching to the city manager has taken almost 15 years?
There wasn't really a discussion, I don't think, about switching it over until I came in and I was talking to Jim about it. And, Jim feels like it's his responsibility to measure his own performance, but it was something initiated many years ago by a previous auditor, and it's just stuck as a city
Okay,
auditor
good.
work
I
plan
appreciate the
item.
explanation. Good.
So, I do have some concerns. We want to switch to kind of the options for creating this stuff. You guys have gotten really good at it. I mean, getting the hours down to 400 hours is impressive. And that's not a full-time, that's not an FTE. So I'm a little bit concerned that you guys kind of got this process down, and now we're going to switch it over to OMB, which is really understaffed, and have to hire another person. And, I almost wonder if, like, one of your other options was, like, the second bullet here, producing an updated version. And so, I think there's kind of a mix of things here. The city manager's office and the department heads could be working on useful metrics. And again, we're doing this ERP redesign, and I think that's really a key part of the ERP, that it should be collecting and reporting useful data. And like the city manager could own that, but you could still own production of the annual report. And hopefully there would be alignment there, and you could do some of the things you're talking about, which is auditing that report at the same time. But, I'd like to hear more about really why giving, just kind of in terms of time and dollars, we would want to move it.
It's more because then they're monitoring their performance rather than us just collecting data and putting it in a report.
But I'm saying those are separate
Well,
things.
look, I think we hire.
They could monitor their performance and use the ERP versus producing this annual report. That's kind of, those are two different things.
I think it's a good idea as we explore the ERP to see what kind of data can come from the ERP directly into Questica.
Well, that's making a non-manual, right?
Right.
Obviously, the more
But it's-
non-manual, the better.
It's assuming, though, that, like, there are certain measures that hopefully will come, such as, number of employees who don't pass probation. That's a sign you're not doing good recruiting, right? An ERP system should be able to tell you that in a year and feed that data. There's other measures that may not be as easily received.
Right.
So.
And I know Questica has some reporting. I know it has a dashboard capability, but I also know that its reporting capabilities aren't that great. But you can use third-party software like Crystal Reports or something like that and develop reports directly from Questica rather than right now. That performance report, every single page is an individual PowerPoint slide.
Okay.
It's not the most efficient way of producing it. I think having an automated report would make more sense, but
Has Questica been used?
it's being used right now only for budget purposes. So the departments at budget time, a few months before the budget comes forward, they put all their performance measures in there. If they want to update something, they put that in there. But we're not taking the data from that to use for the performance report. We're still sending a spreadsheet out to the departments and say, fill this out, and this is where we get that's where we get the data from. So there's also some timing issues because we're doing ours. When they put their budget information in, it's really like for fiscal year 16 budget, they put in fiscal year 15 data because that was what was available. They're putting that in about the time that we would have already completed right about the time we would have been completing our performance report. So,
So can you explain, it's not clear to me that the performance metrics are necessarily tied to the budget. When you talk about things like satisfaction, response time, like it's clear to me that that maybe belongs to the city manager in terms of management performance, but why the tie to the budget?
Well, a program budget should tell you this is what suppression in the fire department costs, and then here's our data on how we're doing. So that when you're reviewing the budget, you might say, or the code enforcement example is a great one. Let's say we shared with you that we respond to code enforcement violations within 30 days of receiving the complaint. And in the budget process, you say, that's unacceptable. We want within 3 business days of the complaint coming in that our citizen's been contacted. And we say we're going to need a lot more code enforcement officers to deliver that service. So there should be a tie and a link between what you're spending the resource investment and the results.
Right.
Just like the workers'
Just as long as
comp.
we're getting that, those performance metrics are not necessarily all dollar related. So I would just be worried if it's driven by OMB, they would focus on financial metrics.
Well, they shouldn't be. They're management and budget, so
Yeah.
they're management as well. So
Okay.
they should be helping us look at performance, and we should make sure when we communicate that we communicate in terms of what is it. Here's what you're investing. Here's your return.
And the other thing I wanted to say is, I thought the metrics should tell reasonably agreed upon what the metric means. And I'll give you an example. You just said that if we have a number of employees that don't meet probation, but we were not necessarily recruiting correctly.
We may have a problem.
But you also may have a problem if too many employees get through probation, because you may not be
Evaluating
correctly and letting go because given the way the civil service works, you actually end up with
I'd
employees.
give you a different measure on that.
So I'm just saying that I think it's not always that easy to know
Yeah.
what these metrics mean. And so obviously you have, as a manager, it's not easy. I mean, if you're going to report to council, I think some of the metrics you report to council are clearly useful to us. Code enforcement occurred in this and that. We all have a sense of what that means. And you're right tying it to resources. But there should be a lot of internal ones maybe that the city manager uses
that
for
don't go in
performance
the budget.
that don't go in that, something like that, right? I'm not sure, unless you said historically the pattern is we've done all these studies and 90% should be the number, and if you're above 90%, you're letting too many people through. If you're below 90%, you're not. I mean, but I'm not sure we have the data to back up what
Yeah,
those numbers
I
are.
was just giving you some that I've worked on recently, but truly, if 10% of your employees are not successful, you have an issue. You're not doing a good recruitment.
Right, I wasn't really
process.
interested in the details of it.
Right.
It was more a point of that you could have metrics that don't necessarily.
Tied to the budget.
And we as council members who don't have the background may interpret them incorrectly. I say that all the time on council. You know, we get some data, and maybe I'm interpreting incorrectly, but I think my fellow council member is interpreting incorrectly. And it's open to interpretation without anyone having any training in how you interpret that
It's
data.
a good point. Could we come back to this for a minute, Tom? You started there. And I'm reading your policy implications again. I'm wondering, as I look at this, whether or not we might start with number 2 and morph into number 3. And part of it is just knowing, it's one of those times when you know what's going on within the city, and we know that, as you said, Tom, the OMB numbers are down, and it may be, Harriet, that you have time to monitor this for another year. So what you said is, should you continue producing this until implementation of a new performance system is in place?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you should do this for another year and then gradually then do the soft transition over to the city manager's office. Is that something you two could support, or do you look?
So the other point I want to talk about was the move to the new ERP system, which may or may not happen in a year. But
It won't happen in
Right.
a year. It's probably at least 2018.
Right. So I think there's some interesting challenges there, right? So again, the city manager and the department heads, you really got to spend some time thinking about your processes when you design an ERP. And I could see a role for the auditor in that process, as long as it's kind of the right role. I think, again, the departments need to own their own metrics.
Right.
But you could have a role in that. And so if you kept this report until that new ERP was in place, that might make more sense.
So we are actually, so IT is starting 2 tracks for planning the new system, which is part of their phase 2. One is a strategic phase and one is a tactical phase. The tactical phase is really looking at the requirements for each department, documenting them. The strategic phase is thinking of it more on a broader sense. And Jonathan has asked for a representative from each department to participate in that. And I've had discussion with him, and we're going to participate more as an advisor.
Yeah.
So kind of the role you're talking
I actually
about
think
on
you
that
should
piece of
You
it.
should be the council's representative in the design of the ERP. So what are the metrics that should be exposed to council, and make sure they're collected?
So we've got something going with Jonathan about what our role would be for that, and then I'm also planning to put some items into our performance audit plan.
So that's not the
But
role of the
that's-
auditor, though.
Well, but we don't really have anybody that could represent us, right?
Sure, the city manager represents us.
Well,
Like,
okay.
we hire and fire him. I mean, that's
But
his job.
Ours is, we're looking
In
at
terms
it
of
more.
reporting and auditing.
Yeah, we're looking at it more from an advisory role and thinking about what types of things we would look at from an audit perspective, and making sure that if we see something that's going astray from what we would expect to see if we were in there auditing, that we're advising them that this is really not the way we would want to see it be done. And that's really the role that we're planning to take for that piece of it.
So I find this to be a really difficult discussion, because you give us, 4
Four
options
options.
here. There's no really report from the city manager's office as to what they want. I mean, I find that, and this is all about, so if you guys came to me and said, we'd like to do the soft transition, that's the recommendation of the city manager's office, that's your recommendation, I'd be like, yeah, that's great, and here are the mechanics to do it. If you came to us and said, we want to do the auditor's office production of an updated version of the report, and then try and do it, Liz just said, and transition to the soft transition in a year because of these things, that would be very helpful too. So I don't feel like I have enough information to say, no, let's do the soft transition right now, which frankly would be my preference, because I don't think this report's all that useful. I think you spent a lot of time on it. I'm actually wondering if you could maybe cut one of your staff members or have them work half-time on, if you're saving 400 hours, you've gone from 2,000 hours, and so we could save some on that FTE. And maybe that's not a possibility, maybe it is. But I mean, I'm thinking just, maybe you guys could put together and come back to us with, after talking, this is what we think the right staff recommendation is.
Yeah, and we did talk. I just want to say that, and we were pretty clear, this is not a current year thing that could be handled. We were actually saying we would try, if the OMB could get staffed up, to implement in conjunction with a budget cycle. But it really does take bringing in a consultant to work with you on best practice and
Which is the fourth point here.
right.
Just the fourth point.
But it is an effort, and I do think it's going to be reflective, and we can prepare a response and a joint recommendation. That some of it's going to be based on
But
time
it's-
and resources.
It sounds a whole lot to me, just listening to the time and resources, as though if you took number 2 and gradually moved it into number 3, that soft transition, without getting into all the bells and whistles of it, that would actually go reasonably well, hearing Suzanne and what she's been saying.
I would support that.
I'm just concerned, again, 400 hours, 10 weeks versus a FTE. There's like
Well,
a
it was
mismatch.
2,000 hours. I want to share this. So Harriet had the equivalent of a full-time staff person doing this job. I mean, and the other thing is what's being recommended is beyond what's being done. Right now, Harriet's just providing you data. She's taking data from the departments and putting it into a nice report and giving some commentary. But what really is being recommended, that you have a vigorous system that is kept updated, that someone's working with the departments, training them on what's needed, keeping, we're going to do quarterly reporting or whatever that might look like. So you really are talking about a much more rigorous effort than just collecting data.
That's this updated version that you speak of.
No, that's not, no, that's the transition to
That's
city manager's
transition,
office.
correct.
No,
So-
that's number 2. The
Well,
auditor's
it's
office.
really part of number 3. Once it's transitioned over, that's what it would become, more of a management.
Well, I think we
performance
should
management.
transition it. I just think this is about timing tonight.
Right.
More
I'm
than
good with
anything
2 to
else.
3 if Harriet's good with 2 to 3.
I'm good with 2
Yeah.
to 3, and I'm not even certain 1 year is enough. We need to take, I think we just sort of play by
Some
ear.
of us
We
will be
do-
here in a year from now.
Yeah, we do a report this year. Maybe we scale it back
some of us
again.
won't.
Some of it's, we scale it back maybe and take what the departments told us are the key measures this year and eliminate all the rest of that from the report. One of the things that we also need to work on, in reference to Councilmember Scharf's comment about is it really meaningful, is a lot of the performance measures don't have targets in the performance report. And so without a target, you don't really know, is that good or is it bad? Because we don't know what it should be.
And the targets are in the budget document. 'Cause
For the ones that are.
For the proposed year, you should be setting a target. You should also be explaining, why is this measure important? That's what I've always had. Why is it important to
Yes.
measure
Exactly.
this?
Yeah.
Yes.
That was really my point.
And I
Yes.
think, yeah, if
and
we
that
focus on
has
that.
been a section that
Because
is-
some stuff
So it seems really useful.
kind of
if you-
useless.
If you keep the report this year and you focus on improving the measures, deleting, adding, things that are useful. And again, I think the criteria is it's useful to the department head, the city manager, and to the council.
And I like the idea of using the summer intern because it's a perfect role for that.
Mhm.
And I know from time to time you've mentioned a dashboard, Tom. I don't quite know.
That's kind of how I view this. Is kind of
Yeah, although dashboards, as I've used them, tend to focus in one particular area so that you can really look at them. When I was at the county, we did the hospital on a dashboard. Easy to keep, very, very clear. How many patients have you got in there? What's happening to them? How many infections? I mean, it was really very determinative. I'm not quite sure how you take an entire city from A to Z and put it on a dashboard.
Well, some of the systems, as far as the dashboards are concerned, is I, as the city manager, have a dashboard that comes off the system. And I say, these are my top 10 measures in the city, and I want to see them monthly. And the target Harriet speaks of. So we set a target of less than 3 days to respond to a code enforcement violation. And that's, let's say, on our dashboard. And the city manager sees, 2 months in a row, we're at 14 working days. It's showing up red, so the dashboard actually has colors on it. This is way out of range. Is it good to be more or less? You program all that into the system. I mean, this was the system I was building. And everybody has their own dashboard. Each council member could have their own dashboard. It pushes right out to them. So that's sometimes what's referred to as a dashboard.
If you go too far, then it becomes hard to maintain. And
Yes.
people
Right.
want to use it every day. So checking that balance is tough.
Yeah.
But again, if I could see kind of starting down that path by refining this report, at some point bringing in a consultant, and then kind of moving over to the new system.
And maybe that's also part of the future, is that we actually develop a transition plan that we think would be workable and what the requirements would be, working perhaps with a consultant on what's a reasonable system, what would the requirements be, what would frequency be, where would it be housed. Then we could come back with the transition plan, because then we would be informed as to what's required.
So if we were to move from 2 to 3, it sounds as though that could be reasonable. So I would make a motion that we incorporate the number 2 recommendation from you, Harriet, and within a reasonable length of time, move to the soft transition that you have suggested. And I would not limit the time at this point. I think that's something that we need to.
What about what Suzanne just said, and have them come back with a
So I'll second
plan
that.
for how they do that transition?
I'll second that, because I think that's fine. We can add in the. I
Yeah,
I
I
don't want to
think
be
I'd
too
just like-
prescriptive on the city manager. I mean,
I'd just
I would
like
like
to
to add
move
in
it
and come
along
back
at
with
this
a plan,
point.
but you suggested that you're the city manager's office, and I'm not going to tell you to go hire a consultant, because you may decide you don't need a consultant, or you may decide you need a consultant. It's up to you guys.
Well, it depends on how rigorous we want this. I mean, that's really honestly, Walter had a plan, and I remember before he left, we all met, and it definitely was to transition to Questica, to go out and have the departments evaluate the data. And it wasn't about, is this the right measure for code enforcement? And sometimes a consultant will help you say, what are really the best practice measures? What would you recommend? So if really it's about transitioning everything to Questica, bringing the measures down to what's meaningful for us, that might not need a consultant.
So we've got a motion.
I second it.
I think you all can work with that. Am I right? I'm thinking how many people we're talking have been gone. We're talking about Walter's gone, and pretty soon we're going to be talking about you're gone, Suzanne.
I know it's a
So
crazy,
can you repeat that motion?
crazy
Yeah.
opportunity.
So my motion is based on Harriet's options for discussion. Is that the auditors take number 2, and I won't attempt to condense it other than to say that you do the updated version and you move at some pace, not to be determined by us tonight, but at some pace, to the soft transition to the city manager's office, to the OMB.
And can we add, and they will come back to us at some point with a
Whenever.
plan for how they're going to do that?
What's a reasonable amount of time for you to come back with that again? Do you need 6 months?
Well, I think definitely 6 months. I also think in conjunction with
Or more than
planning
6 months.
Actually, 6 months would be good, because in conjunction with next year's budget process, as we plan the budget, there may
Right,
be
you
a
gotta come
step.
So I'd also like David to know if David thinks that's reasonable, because he knows the
Hi, David.
limitations
Hi,
of
guys.
OMB right now.
David Ramberg, Assistant Director of Administrative Services. So I did talk with Lalo ahead of time, and at a high level, ASD is very much on board with whatever plan you guys decide on doing. So the soft plan idea is fine. The main concern, as already has been articulated, and you guys know well, is OMB is very thin on staff right now, and we need our primary objective is bringing in the new staff, getting them trained up, and then really focusing on what Finance Committee and Council needs us to focus on, which is getting the budget fixed in 2018. So that'll be kind of the primary focus over the next bunch of months, 6 months, going into next year. The 6-month idea of coming back with a plan probably sounds about right. We can probably do something that would be right around year end. So it might be a busy time with finance committee and other things like that. So we might need a little room on that.
Whatever, I'd just like
Okay.
to hear what the plan is.
What do you think, David?
So
Come back
probably
within 6 to 9 months?
Probably, yeah, 6 to 9 months would be a little bit more flexible and probably be more workable because January, we could we'll have a little bit more breathing room and we can probably,
Okay,
just.
let's incorporate that
Yeah.
into the motion then.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just, this doesn't need to be in the motion, but I've heard it said a couple of times, I just wanted to be clear that this isn't just an exercise in deleting unneeded metrics. It's really
Right.
figuring out what are the right metrics.
Yes.
So you may be adding metrics, right?
And that would be something we'd spell out in the plan.
And as part of the
what-
transition, what I heard, which sort of seems important to me, is that the auditor's office becomes an auditor here, and not the collection of
Correct.
information. So
Correct.
you go validate the data, because right now your office has the imprinter as if you validated this data.
Right.
Because you're producing the report and you haven't.
Right.
And so I much prefer if the city manager produces it, you audit.
Right,
That
and
makes it
I
much
knew,
more-
I knew there was some perception that we had more of a role than what we've had,
Right.
so.
But, and again, can you just talk a little bit, how did you go from 2,000 hours to 400 hours?
Wait a minute, I think he's a consultant, and maybe he's looking for the,
Well, I'm a little
he's
concerned
looking for
if
your
you now have
truth.
one person
It was
reporting and then
really
auditing, we're gonna
taking
take
a
more
lot
time.
of inefficiencies out of the process. So if you look at the report from a couple of years ago and look at this one,
Yeah.
we've reduced the pages by quite a bit. We've reduced the number of graphs. So if if you look at the one prior to 2014, it was very, very heavy in graphics. A former council member referred to it as graphics gone wild. And yes, and there was a lot of there were a lot of pictures in there, and they were actually cutting out it wasn't just put a picture, it was cut out the outline of the fire engine and put it in there. I mean, there were a lot of inefficiencies in the process, and I've eliminated those.
Okay. So
So
again,
some of this was just smart editing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
so again,
It was good management by Harry. Why don't we say that?
yeah.
Thank you.
So the only concern would be if we now have two groups doing it, that would take a lot more time again, right? So
Well, I think once the process is down and if we can get it automated, then it's just going to be a routine kind of thing. And right now, it's just been a very manual process. I mean, people might think that's automated, but we start off with spreadsheets, we move it into PowerPoint. That's not efficient either. But I think that by eliminating some of that data that we're collecting, that doesn't necessarily be in there. One of the things, we do have a lot of financial data in there. Financial data is also available on the CAFR. Do we need to put it in there too? It's really kind of a question of how much should really be in here. And I think if we focus it really on just the performance aspects, some of that financial data we need to calculate some of the performance aspects, but do we need to put it all in there also?
And I just want to add that in many cities, the performance information is part of the budget. I mean,
Right.
as we're talking
Yes.
about,
Yeah.
and that actually is your performance report. If you want a pretty glossy performance
Yeah.
report, that's a different deal. So it could become just part of our annual budget reporting
our
process.
budget's not long enough. We should have another section. All right. So should we vote on this motion?
Yep.
All in favor?
Hi.
Aye. All right. Thank you. That was a very useful discussion.
Thank you.
And I think it'll be good to get a really useful report.
And
So,
Suzanne will be sad
We're
when
going to
you're
talk about
here for these
next upcoming
discussions.
meetings, right?
Fine.
Because I couldn't find that sheet.
Yeah, I don't have it either.
Do we have an
You
upcoming
got your
meeting
future,
sheet?
future meetings and agendas?
Yeah, future meetings and agendas, because I
Is
didn't see
there,
that.
we got
I'm
anything?
sorry. I sat in on policy and services tonight, and I am not usually the policy and
So-
services.
Trying to, I think we had one.
Jessica, do you?
I don't think there's another one in June.
No, I didn't see. I didn't receive it.
There's another finance committee meeting.
I think, is this our last meeting?
I think it is before the break, but I wanted
The
to,
next
yeah.
meeting is August 8th, I think.
what do we have on
Yeah,
the agendas?
So I have it somewhere.
August 8th, and you know what though, Harriet, we're still on break
So the-
officially.
The next meeting was also primarily an audit meeting.
Yes.
I don't know if I have it.
So, yeah, we shouldn't have the meeting if we're still on break. We
No,
should move it to a
I
night.
I think that will give people a very good reason to not come to the meeting.
Sorry, when
I
is the
think
next
it was
meeting?
right after you're supposed to come back from break. It's a week earlier. I think it's a little bit earlier than it would usually, or there usually isn't a meeting in August, but I think that it's scheduled. It might be the,
Would it be the
do you have the
16th?
date?
I'm trying to
The 9th.
find the date.
August 9th.
But we're on break till the,
August 16th.
yeah, 16th
So we
sounds
should-
rational. Yeah,
August 16th is the
Okay.
meeting.
yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move it from the
But do we
9th to
have, do we have the dates? I mean, not the dates, what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so again, I think there was a printout.
So I know that I have a few items on there. So one of them is
If Beth
the,
someone could just bring it down quickly, the list, that would be helpful.
Let me see if I can pull it up for you. 'cause
All right.
I don't think anybody's upstairs. right
Yeah,
now.
I was gonna say that.
I mean, they don't work till 9?
Only,
Can you find it or no?
Yeah, actually,
I got to print out at some point.
We're good.
I'm going to go. You can surprise me with what
All
you're
right,
going
hope
to
you're feeling better.
discuss. Thanks.
Is there anything particular you were?
Yeah,
I
so,
know-
so I'll
I
tell you
know-
what, before you leave, Liz, what I wanted to say was, the Cities Association, as a group, talked about minimum wage and came up with a schedule.
Oh, that's right. They did last week, didn't
Yeah.
they?
Yes,
I
as
didn't hear the
per,
results.
as per our motion, which basically, our motion was to refer to policy and services and work with the other cities to come up with a regional solution. That was basically the motion, and also to look at.
to work towards 15 in 2018.
Correct, and to look at, what do you call it, the exemptions. That was,
Right.
the Cities Association came up with a schedule to align every city
Yeah,
to
so
be-
we have been talking about
to be that.
getting that on this agenda.
So-
Didn't they say 15 by 2019?
They did, only because Mountain View and Sunnyvale, no one wants, you don't necessarily want to, when they did their study, their economists said you don't want to move too quickly. And so for a lot of people, so by 2019, everyone would be aligned to what Mountain View and Sunnyvale are talking about, is just not implementing their CPI increase, which would then bring everybody to the same by 2019. We obviously can do it earlier and get to 2018.
So you're
but the point
saying
is how
they're
we-
giving it 4 years, 4 cycles to go through? 16, 17, 18, 19?
But forget
Well,
the-
we're in 16 now.
Yeah,
Right, but
right.
we went to
that's-
11.
But we're in the cycle
Right.
right now.
Exactly.
I think Mountain View did it next year, except for small companies. They gave them another year.
They're at, I think Mountain View's at 2018, they're at 15.
Yeah, I
But I
think,
thought at 2017, like
I'm
large
trying to get way
companies
down the
went-
bottom here so they can
So-
see this.
So anyways, Jim and I
Because
talked
it's at
about
the end
this.
here.
Well, I haven't.
It is
seen
on,
here.
we're trying to get on the agenda either in August or September. It's-
I just wanted to make sure we get it on
Yeah.
the agenda,
No,
because
it
I
is.
think
So
we
can
really.
make sure that's on that agenda? Because
It may not be on August, it may be September. We were
It's not-
juggling
I'm not
between the
gonna link
two.
to it.
What's that?
I'm trying to pull up the calendar here.
Okay, so for August 16th, P&S,
So you can
what's
see it.
tentatively scheduled right now is the semi-annual legislative program update, the citywide analytic development and continuous monitoring on cure to pay, hotline protocols discussion, and the auditor office audit plan for fiscal year 17.
What do we have for September?
Take a look.
So I can tell you it was not on there, but we're talking about moving it on.
So I
Okay.
guess the one thing I would just share, that doing this earlier than later would
It's
be
not there.
helpful to staff. Last year, at the end of the year, we were really
Right.
frantic
Doing
to
the
get it. Do you remember we
wages?
came in December with the last meeting?
Right.
And so starting the discussion at least in August would
Yeah, I
be
can't see- I'm not
helpful.
seeing it.
about wages?
Yeah, minimum
Yeah,
wage.
okay.
I mean, I think it'd be great to put that on the August
Because
one.
some of that, the legislative update is nice, but you could actually read that somewhere, even though it's
It could be an
interesting to
information
discuss it.
item.
Yeah.
They come in and talk to us, right?
Yes, yeah, we could wait till.
So I was going to suggest that
September.
I'd like to see that scheduled if possible in August. And
Okay.
if staff's good with that, I think that'd be a really good thing to
Yeah,
do.
it's tough because then we have time to work on legislation or go work with other cities or
Right. And, we obviously need to then draft an ordinance, and I'd like to get that.
the impact on our staff. Like, what's it going to cost the
Huge.
city?
Was this a very lively discussion, or was this,
It was a pretty lively discussion.
oh,
Are other
interesting?
cities getting, I don't know if we
And I could pull it.
Are other cities getting people asking for exceptions and things?
So the cities association was that we should have no exceptions at all.
That's what, so far, that's what everybody's passed.
This is all 15 cities, right?
Yeah, and that's what most people are passing, is no exceptions. And there's a bunch of enforcement issues. If we're gonna have somebody else enforce it for us, it may be easier to have no exceptions, and the closer we are all on. But we were tasked with looking at exceptions, and I do want to hear I do want to fulfill our mission and hear from the restaurant groups and I forget. There's training exceptions, which I personally don't buy into, but there's a bunch of exceptions that we should discuss.
It's not as simple.
And then the state is going to go up anyways in what, 2022? So it's really how much ahead of that are we going to be?
So what also, at some point, I guess I can look into it, but I want to know what else has been referred to P&S.
Yes,
'Cause
we
I
have
don't-
that list.
Because I don't find like this meeting, like really? It wasn't, it wasn't that, I would say it's not
Workers'
exactly a
comp
meeting.
is not
Four
exciting.
items, and the other two got postponed, I believe, just because they weren't ready.
Harriet. Bye,
We can look into that.
Right. I mean, I want to know what we're supposed to accomplish the rest of the year and make sure we're
I
on
can
target.
get
do
that
it.
to you. I have the list.
That'd be great.
Well, great. I'm glad we're doing the minimum wage earlier. And maybe there is something we could do to get you input from the restaurant group.
Oh, they'll come out.
No, I guess what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure, can we send out some kind of survey
I think
on
we
what's
should.
your experience been? If we have the communication through the business registry, could we download the,
I think what was most useful last time we talked about this was comparable city ordinances, for me anyways.
Well, I think the city association is going to have a model ordinance they're going to put together, which should be helpful.
we developed the ordinance this last time, and that was a lot of work, and Cara did that.
Right. So I think you're right.
So it's really updating that, right?
So
Yeah.
So I
And we
think
have San Jose doing enforcement, I think.
we do.
That was
and
the plan, right?
That's what's happening,
Right.
and we haven't had any issues.
I think I saw a session on the league's upcoming, was it the league's upcoming agenda on how to enforce new minimum wage ordinances. I don't know if anyone from the city's going to that conference. That might be a session.
Well,
make sure
I
someone
do
goes.
want to say one thing, just, and I know it's maybe off topic, but we have, there was a whole discussion on prevailing wage and minimum wage, and there are different levels of enforcement, and we are exploring what those mean. Because there was a point, if we were going to proactively enforce, we really needed a dedicated staff, even if we had, another arm, but you needed an incoming, you need to be running reports. Or do we do this more on a complaint basis? So make sure that everyone has to post our notice that says this is what's required. And
I probably vote for complaint
Yeah,
basis.
we
I'm
had
usually
the
that way.
discussion last year.
I think
the way
that's
we went.
some
That's
of the
where you're at.
dialogue going
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
Yeah.
right?
It's hard to go out there and just try to enforce it.
And the other thing was, actually, there weren't that many minimum wage jobs in Palo Alto, and we felt like doing it by complaint with San Jose doing enforcement just made sense.
I haven't gotten any complaints.
Right. Everyone's probably complying.
Right, but we are meeting with some individuals. The state's also having a discussion over taking a larger role on enforcement with
You got a moment?
prevailing wage.
You got a moment?
So,
Yeah, quick.
Okay, you're just walking out?
okay.